Welcome to the KIKAO session. We talked about the cause roots of the rise of the price of food and other commodities like fuel. We talked about some of the impact those rises of the prices have on the common, the ordinary person in our continent. Also, the impact of the war happening very far from here, but having very clear impact, tangible ones. You can see it, you can feel it on the continent. Now, my question is, the pandemic came and had very drastic consequences, impact on the food supply in Africa. The war in Russia-Ukraine comes, and again, consequences on Africa. Tell me, what can we learn from these phenomena which sometimes happen miles away, but which have impact on our populations, especially on food systems?
You know, for the past 10 years, there's something we've been pursuing in the world: globalization, interconnectedness, trade, and all that. That means that there's this interconnectedness, which is good, but also there are the risks. Those are the ones that we are seeing now. When we so much focus on the competitive advantage in terms of what is it that we can produce at a lower cost than our trading partners or than our partners, then we find that for us it's only the agricultural production mainly, which of course fetches low in the world markets. But then you're going to be importing the fertilizers, you're going to import even some food because you cannot produce enough of all that we need, and we're relying on the markets. And that means that now, when there's a shock in a faraway continent, because of this being interconnected, it affects people. What have we learned from that? I think one of the lessons we can take away is that there's space for all this interconnectedness. There's also space for diversification. In terms of, you're going to diversify
at local level.
At the local level, not because you have a competitive advantage, but as a strategy to cushion ourselves against external shocks. Meaning that as governments, you're going to try as much as we can to ensure that we still have the capacities, the abilities to be able to produce at least more than 3/4 of our food needs domestically, if we can. And that is possible, especially in Africa, if we can strengthen and focus on our agricultural systems and focus on the people in terms of improving their ability to produce and to store, and also incentives to make that possible. I think it's the best strategy that we can do.
Ambassador, yes.
Yes, no, I completely really agree with Joy, and I wanted to really add that we have to transform our agri-food systems to be really more efficient, more inclusive, and when I talk inclusivity, it's really let's listen also to the farmers. Their voices is so important to be resilient and really to be sustainable, because we see that unfortunately the way we produce, the way we, let's say, we transform, we process, and even the way we consume is no longer sustainable. So we have to build that resilience. Really building resilience is so important, so that really the farmers, they can really resist to shocks. There are so many, of course, projects and programs that we, as FAO, of course, working very closely with the government of Kenya, talking about Kenya, and also with the county governments, because, of course, when we talk about agriculture, agriculture is devolved, that we are implementing, like the climate smart agriculture. I just came from Nyamira last week, and I had this contact with really farmers that are really coming together, producing the African indigenous vegetables that are so nutritious, and that are really, of course, expanding, reaching markets. So those are the things that really we have to raise awareness. We have to promote also our local, of course, traditional food that is so nutritious and also important. And of course, limit, of course, that dependence on maybe other grains that are also, of course, staple food of this country, are so important. But really, the diversification, I do agree with the doctors.
So we need to do something about it. Not too much dependence. Reduce the dependence to the global market, to the importation system, and to that comparative advantage that a continent may have on this, and reduce that reliance. And we say, okay, it will come from Ukraine, it will come from America, it will come, and try to produce what we need. I will come to another thing which probably connects with what Ambassador Mkavi have said. Connect the dot in our food system. I believe that on the African continent, in many countries currently, there are some regions where they produce those traditional vegetable, but also some other crops which are not necessarily wheat and rice or maize, probably, although maize is quite common in our continent. And they don't have a way of supplying the urban areas where we have more mouth to feed. So what do you say about also opening the market and facilitating that supply chain that you talked about, which was disrupted at continental level or international level, but which could be somehow strengthened at national level, so that we connect ourselves and we caution, as you say, the disruption of the importation from outside. What do you say about this?
Yes, it is true. In Kenya, every single day, somebody is starving, somebody is in abundance. And there is how that food can reach the markets and reach those that need it at affordable prices is been a challenge. Sometimes impassable roads. And sometimes, again, in Kenya, one of the biggest problems we have is the middleman. The middleman has got all the incentives to ensure that there is lower food amounts reaching the urban cities, because then he makes a profit. So he is likely to buy from farmers at a lower cost because he wants to limit the supplies in the cities. You get that mathematics of middleman. The farmers have a lot, isn't it? But because you have an incentive to make a profit, a kill, you want to buy less from the farmers, meaning that your demand from the farmers is low and the supply is high. So there you make a kill because you buy it at a very low cost. Then you bring into the cities, sell it very expensive. So you find that in the rural areas, much as this abundance, the same thing, like for example, a tomato in Nairobi now is going between 10 shillings and 15 shillings, one piece. If you go to where they're coming from in Kinagop, you'll be buying 4 for 20 shillings. What happens in between there? So governments have to be very decisive on how to make farmers access markets directly. Put them in cooperatives, put them in whichever way you organize them, but farmers have to reach the consumers directly without going through somebody who has got their own.
They need to get a fair return of their investment.
Exactly.
At that level.
And that's a policy issue, and it has to be a very decisive.
That is a policy issue.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I will connect that to what she said sometime, that we need to start producing some of these crops and these commodities that we import from outside, so that if it is disrupted, at least we have 2/3 she talked about. Tell me, does that change all the policies and strategies in the agricultural sector?
The reality is that really as the continent and in the region, we have to invest in agriculture. I should say that really Africa is so blessed with land, with water, with sun. So therefore, what we really need is to invest in production and productivity. We need to increase production and productivity. And what does it mean? What does it require? It requires really investing. We have the Maputo Declaration, where heads of states of this continent, again, they really agree really to allocate 10% of their GDP into agriculture. But you know, when you look around, very few countries have reached that target. So if we are not investing, we cannot really harness that potential that we have. That giant, because the others, they say that it's a giant that is sleeping in Africa, and we are not really investing in order to harness, to feed our people, and of course even to feed the world. Africa has that potential. So again, I really go back to the Food System Summit in Kenya. They were really very engaging and consultative national dialogues that came up with a very strong pathways, you know, that is really showing that let's build the resilience of the farmers so that they can resist to shocks with programs such as the Climate Smart Agriculture and others. Let's really invest in digitalization. Here we have to bring research. Dr. Joy is here, is really coming from the university. Research is really very important.
Very important.
Improve the seeds that can really, of course, resist again to the shocks and climate change. Talk about technology, talk about science, talk about data so that we can really focus also really our approaches. And of course, the opportunities again of agriculture. Invest on women that are really the backbone of agriculture. There are so many reports. Actually, FAO is a knowledge-based organization. And we have realized that, you know, if you really invest, if the women were given really the same amount of inputs, resources, and opportunities, such as men, the production of productivity would even increase on something like 20%, which is really high. And then, of course, the opportunities that you really find in agriculture, also for young people. When you really bring the science, the technologies, innovation, which is so critical, you know, from production to consumption. We talk about really processing, transportations. So there is so much that we can really harness if we really invest in agriculture. We can no longer continue depending on the rain fed. We really have to look at, you know, the irrigation schemes. So those are the things that we have really to do, and they are doable. And I should say that if we do it, we'll see that transformation that we're really aiming at.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think here we have gotten like a whole strategy to transform agriculture. What Ambassador is saying is exactly what was aimed by our top leaders when they say we need to transform agriculture, and that is in the declaration she talked about, Maputo, but also repeated in a certain way in Malabo. And here one of the key challenges that we have is to implement the policies, to implement the strategies the way they are developed, to walk the talk and implement the commitment our leaders have taken at continental level. Even at country level it happens. If we did, and then take into account all those productivity factors, like women, like the youth, provide input, smoothen the market supply, the market access, and the supply chain. Consider the whole food system rather than isolated actions. I think the situation would be totally different. Let's take a break, and when we come, we will dwell in what exactly we need to do. What are those changes? What are those actions that we need to take so that we can reduce the impact those global phenomena can have on our citizens on the African continent, and wake up that giant. Wake up that giant so that we can feed ourselves and feed the world.